you ever heard someone's last words? I was at work when my phone rang. It was my sister's hospice. Your little sister is declining fast. She has maybe a few hours left if she's lucky. The clipboard fell from my hands. For months, I'd been the one sleeping in that chair beside her bed, learning how to braid her thinning hair, watching Frozen with her for the 100th time. Mom claimed she couldn't handle seeing her baby like this, but she'd promised that she'd be there at the end. She's asking for her mother. I was already running to my car. I'm 20 minutes away, there's construction on I-95. Please, just hold the phone to her ear, let me talk to her. Of course. I could hear Rose's labored breathing through the phone. Hey, Butterfly, it's me. I'm coming right now, okay? Mommy's coming too. Mommy? Her voice was so small. I called Mom while merging into gridlock traffic. 20 minutes was now looking like 40. She answered on the 4th ring. In the background, I could hear loud music and the clink of glasses. Mom, it's Rose. The hospice says she could be gone any minute. Oh, honey, I'm at bottomless brunch with the girls from book club. My hands gripped the steering wheel. Mom, Rose is dying. Today. Right now. Get there now. But I already paid $40 for unlimited drinks until 1 p.m. It's only 11:48. I watched the traffic ahead, completely stopped. A sea of red brake lights. Mom, I'll pay you back. I'll pay you $1,000. Just please. I heard her talking to someone else. Another round for the table. The peach bellinis this time. Mom, I've had like 6 mimosas, honey. I need to eat something first. Can't show up drunk to a hospice. I hung up and called the hospice back. I need someone with Rose. Anyone. Please don't let her be alone. All our staff are with other patients in critical. What about volunteers? Other families? Anyone? I called my ex-girlfriend. No answer. My roommate. Rose's teacher from before she got sick. Weekend trip. All too busy to visit a 9-year-old on the brink of depth. At 12:15 p.m., the hospice nurse held the phone to Rose's ear again. Is Mommy coming? She whispered. She's on her way, Butterfly. The lie burned my throat. I called Mom again. Mom, Rose specifically asked for you. Please. I said I'll come after. They just brought the French toast. I can't waste food. Your daughter is dying. Don't be so dramatic. You said she has time. I called her an Uber from my phone. It was canceled 2 minutes later by the rider. I called her sister, my aunt. I'm not getting involved in your mom's issues again. 12:30 p.m. Mom texted, just one more drink, then I'll leave. Traffic finally started moving. GPS said 35 minutes. I called 3 of Mom's neighbors, begging them to physically drag her out of the restaurant. They all had excuses. 12:45 p.m. I called Mom again. She was slurring now. Why are you being such a buzzkill? She's been dying for months. What's another hour? At 1 p.m., the hospice nurse came back on. She's asking if her mommy is mad at her. My vision blurred with tears. I was still 8 minutes away. Tell her mommy loves her so much. Tell her... Wait, she wants to say something. I heard rustling, then Rose's voice, barely a whisper. Tell mommy, it's okay. 1:03 p.m. I burst through the hospice doors, taking the stairs 3 at a time. Room 532. Rose looked so small in that bed, her skin almost translucent. When I crashed through the door, completely out of breath, my keys cutting into my palm from gripping them so hard, her eyes fluttered open. Rose, I'm here. I love you so much. I'm so sorry, She squeezed my hand with what little strength she had left. Her lips moved. I leaned in close. Love... Her mouth formed the shape of U, but no sound came. Her hand went slack in mine. Beep. The nurse quietly entered to turn the machines off. Mom arrived at 1:35 p.m., reeking of champagne and carrying 2 Target bags. I stopped to get her a stuffed animal, she announced, pulling out a unicorn. Where is... She saw Rose's still form, the empty eyes, the silence where machines used to beep. Why didn't you try harder to get me here? She turned on me, her voice rising. You knew I was out. You should have sent a car service or... She asked for you 17 times, the nurse said quietly. Your son held the phone to her ear so she could hear your voice, but... Mom's face hardened. She was dying anyway. What difference would it have made? I held up Rose's last drawing, still on her bedside table. Stick figures labeled me and Mommy, holding hands under a rainbow. You're trying to make me feel guilty, Mom spat. She didn't even know I wasn't here. I said nothing. I was ready to give my mom the same treatment she gave her daughter. I kept holding Rose's small hand, even though it was already getting cold, and Mom kept going on about how none of this was her fault, while the nurse quietly started pulling out the IV lines from Rose's thin arm. The room felt way too small with Mom's breath filling it with that gross champagne smell, and I knew I had to get out before I said something I couldn't take back. I let go of Rose's hand and walked past Mom without looking at her, but she followed me into the hallway asking what arrangements I'd made, acting like she'd been involved this whole time. I told her I hadn't made any yet because I was actually here with Rose, and she got all huffy and said she was going to make some calls, which probably just meant she was going to update her Facebook. I sat down in the family room with my head in my hands when this woman named Diane Stratton from Hospice Social Services found me and sat down with a big folder of paperwork. She was really gentle but also direct about what needed to happen next, talking about body release forms and funeral home selection and death certificates, and I was just grateful someone was treating this as real instead of some inconvenience. She helped me fill out the forms while Mom was outside on her phone, and Diane gave me a list of funeral homes in the area, along with some information about financial assistance for families. After signing everything, I went back to Rose's room alone while Mom was still outside. And I started gathering her things, carefully folding her favorite unicorn pajamas that were way too big for her now, and packing her iPad with all the games she loved playing. I took the drawing from her bedside table, the one with us under the rainbow, and pressed it flat between two notebooks so it wouldn't get wrinkled. My phone rang about an hour later, and it was William Stratton from Stratton Funeral Home, one of the places Diane had recommended, and he explained they could handle the transfer today and asked if we could meet tomorrow morning to discuss arrangements. I agreed to 9 in the morning and was writing it down when Mom burst back in demanding we have an open casket service with Rose in her pageant dress from 2 years ago that probably wouldn't even fit her anymore. She wanted flowers everywhere and a reception at the country club, making it all about how things would look to other people while refusing to talk about who was going to pay for any of it. I just nodded and kept packing Rose's things while Mom went on about what kind of flowers and how many people we should invite, and I realized she was planning Rose's funeral like it was some kind of party. When I finally got everything packed and the paperwork done, I drove home alone with my hands shaking so bad I had to pull over twice just to breathe. In the silence of my car, Rose's whispered words kept playing in my head, how she said to tell Mommy it's okay, and I punched the steering wheel over and over until my knuckles started bleeding. I sat there in some random parking lot for 20 minutes just trying to stop shaking before I could drive again. My phone rang, and it was Conrad Peck, my boss, asking why I'd left work so suddenly without telling anyone. When I explained about Rose, his voice got really soft, and he told me to take whatever time I needed, that the team would cover my projects, and he asked if there was anything else he could do to help. I thanked him and said I'd let him know about the funeral arrangements once they were set, and he said not to worry about work at all right now. Later that night, when I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, Diane texted me a list of grief support groups in the area and some additional funeral homes if I wanted more options. She also included a note about financial assistance programs, specifically for families dealing with child loss, and I took a screenshot right away because I knew I was going to need help paying for everything. I couldn't sleep at all, just kept thinking about Rose asking for Mom 17 times, and Mom choosing mimosas instead, so I got up and created a new folder on my phone called Evidence. I started saving every text from Mom about brunch, the screenshot showing she canceled the Uber I ordered for her, all of it, not really knowing why I was doing it but feeling like I'd need proof of what really happened today. I saved the timeline I'd written down too, every phone call and text with timestamps, because something told me Mom was going to try to change the story later. My apartment felt too quiet without knowing Rose was at the hospice, without having somewhere I needed to be tomorrow to sit with her, and I just sat there adding more screenshots to the folder until the sun started coming up. My eyes burned from staring at my phone screen all night, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red brake lights stretching forever on I-95. What if I'd left work 5 minutes earlier, or taken the back roads through downtown instead of the highway? What if I'd called Mom at 10 instead of waiting until the hospice called me? The what-ifs kept spinning while I held Rose's drawing against my chest in the dark. At some point, I must have dozed off because my alarm went off at 8, and I had to get ready to meet William Stratton at the funeral home. I threw on the same clothes from yesterday and drove to Stratton Funeral Home where William was already waiting in the lobby. His daughter Lainey appeared with a cup of coffee before I even sat down, and she didn't ask how I took it, but somehow it was perfect with just a little sugar. William spread out brochures and price sheets across his desk and started explaining the basic package, which was already more than I had in my savings account. That was before adding the cemetery plot or the headstone or any kind of actual service. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom saying she couldn't contribute anything because she'd just paid $12,000 for her bathroom renovation last month. But then she wrote that we absolutely had to get the mahogany casket with silk lining because what would people think if we went cheap? I showed William the text and watched his face stay professionally neutral while he quietly slid the cremation brochure toward me. He explained it was dignified and more affordable, and we could still have a beautiful urn and memorial service. I was trying to process the numbers when my phone rang, and it was Diane from the hospice offering to help mediate a family meeting about the arrangements. Her voice was calm and professional, but I could tell she'd dealt with families like mine before. She suggested a conference call for this afternoon at 3 to discuss everything as a family. I agreed, even though I knew how it would go. At exactly 3 o'clock, I joined the call with Mom and Diane, and it lasted maybe 4 minutes before Mom started sobbing about how hard this was for her. She kept saying nobody understands what a mother goes through losing her baby, and how dare anyone question her grief. Diane tried redirecting twice, but Mom just got louder about her suffering. After Mom hung up in tears, Diane called me back privately and explained that as Rose's primary caregiver who'd been making medical decisions, I had the legal right to make funeral arrangements as next of kin. She said it gently, but we both knew what she was really saying. I went back to William's office and chose cremation with a simple purple urn since that was Rose's favorite color. I pulled out my phone and typed a note to myself that said, "Rose deserved so much more than this, but I promise to keep you safe now." The decision felt right, and it meant avoiding the whole spectacle Mom wanted to create for her friends. I just signed the paperwork when Conrad called with someone from HR on the conference line to explain the bereavement leave policy. They were kind, but there were forms to fill out and documentation they needed, and deadlines for submitting everything. The HR person kept listing requirements while I tried to write them down, but my hand was shaking and I kept missing things. They said they'd email everything, but I was already drowning in emails and calls and decisions. That evening, I was trying to eat some toast when my phone started blowing up with notifications. Mom had posted on Facebook about losing her precious angel with a photo from 3 years ago at Rose's school play before she ever got sick. The comments were pouring in from her book club friends and neighbors who hadn't visited once during the months Rose was dying. Everyone was telling Mom how strong she was and what an amazing mother she'd been and how lucky Rose was to have her. Mom was replying to every single comment with crying emojis and long paragraphs about her pain. I started typing my own post with timestamps of every call from that morning and screenshots of Mom canceling the Uber and choosing brunch over her dying daughter. I had 3 paragraphs written about where Mom really was while Rose asked for her 17 times. But I didn't hit post. Instead, I saved it to drafts and took more screenshots of people calling Mom a warrior mother and saying they couldn't imagine her pain. I added them all to my evidence folder, not sure why, but feeling like I needed to document the real story somewhere. My phone rang and I almost didn't answer, but the number looked familiar. It was the hospice nurse who'd been with Rose that morning, and she said she probably shouldn't be calling, but wanted me to know something. She said right before I got there, Rose had been humming Let It Go from Frozen very softly. She said Rose seemed peaceful, like she was waiting, and when she heard my voice on the phone, she'd smiled a little. The nurse said she'd seen a lot of kids pass, and she really believed Rose was holding on until she heard me say, I loved her. After she hung up, I sat there holding the phone and crying for the first time since Rose died, because at least she knew I was there even if Mom wasn't. The next morning, I drove to Stratton Funeral Home with my eyes still puffy and red from crying. William met me at the door, and his daughter Lainey brought me coffee without asking while we walked through their showroom. She pulled out different urns from the display shelves and set them on the counter one by one. The bronze ones looked too heavy and serious for a 9-year-old. The white marble felt cold when I touched it. Then Lainey showed me a purple one that wasn't too big or too fancy. I picked it up and turned it in my hands, feeling the smooth surface. She mentioned they could engrave butterflies on it since that's what I'd called Rose, and I nodded because my throat was too tight to speak. William handled all the paperwork at his desk while I signed where he pointed and tried not to look at the total cost at the bottom. Back at my apartment, I opened my laptop and typed out an email to Mom with every single funeral expense listed line by item. I asked her to just cover the flowers she kept insisting we needed for appearances. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with her response calling me manipulative and cruel for trying to guilt her about money when she was grieving. At the bottom, she'd pasted a link to plastic flowers from the dollar store with a note that these would be just fine. I stared at my bank account balance and thought about starting a GoFundMe, but the idea of explaining to strangers that Rose's own mother wouldn't help pay for her funeral made my stomach turn. The shame felt too heavy to put into words that people would read and judge. My phone rang, and it was Diane calling with news about a small grant from a children's grief foundation. She said it could cover up to $2,000 of the funeral costs, and she'd already started gathering the paperwork we'd need. She walked me through each form over the phone and emailed me the links while we talked. I spent the next 3 hours at my kitchen table filling out every section of that grant application. I attached copies of the funeral home receipts and Rose's medical records from the past 6 months. The hardest part was writing the letter about our situation, where I had to explain being Rose's primary caregiver while Mom was absent. My hands shook typing about the months I'd slept in that hospital chair and learned to give her medications through her port. Diane said those details would strengthen the application, but each sentence felt like reliving it all over again. That night I couldn't sleep, and at 3 a.m. I grabbed my phone and hit record on a voice memo. I talked for 20 minutes straight about Mom's selfishness and how she'd abandoned Rose when she needed her most. I described every detail of that morning with the timestamps and the brunch, and Rose asking 17 times for a mother who chose mimosas instead. I played it back once and heard my voice breaking and getting louder with each accusation. Instead of sending it, I saved it to my evidence folder with all the screenshots and texts. My phone buzzed with an email from Conrad asking about project deadlines and saying the team was struggling to cover my workload. He wasn't trying to pressure me but needed to know when I might be back. The guilt hit immediately because the world kept spinning and expecting things from me while Rose was gone. I closed the email without responding and decided to drive to Mom's house while she was at her Wednesday wine club. I still had my key from when I used to check on things before Rose got sick. Her room looked exactly the same as the day she'd gone into the hospital 6 months ago, with stuffed animals on the bed and drawings taped to the walls. I started packing her favorite things into a box when I saw papers on her little desk. There, in Rose's shaky handwriting, was a letter that started with, "Dear Mommy, I hope you're not sad when I'm gone." I had to sit down on the floor because I couldn't breathe looking at those words she'd written maybe weeks ago when she could still hold a pencil. The letter was only half finished and ended mid-sentence about wanting Mom to remember the good times. I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket, knowing I'd never show it to Mom. Rose deserved to keep her last words private, without them being twisted into another performance for Mom's friends. I decided right there that the letter would go in the urn with her ashes where it belonged. My phone rang, and it was Mom demanding we hold the memorial at her country club because her friends expected it. She refused to use the hospice chapel where Rose's nurses wanted to say goodbye. When I said no, she threatened to plan her own separate service and invite everyone we knew. She said I was being selfish and trying to exclude her from her own daughter's memorial. I hung up without responding and added her voicemail to my evidence folder, even though I didn't know what I was collecting evidence for. 3 days later, Diane called while I was eating cereal to tell me the grant got approved for $1,500, which would cover most of the cremation costs. I transferred $800 from my savings right away to cover the rest and knew I'd be eating ramen and peanut butter for the next few months, but at least it was done. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank notebook trying to write Rose's eulogy and kept starting over because everything sounded wrong. I wrote about how she loved Frozen and would sing Let It Go, even when the chemo made her voice crack. I wrote about her butterfly drawings that covered every wall of her hospital room. I wrote about how she always saved half her candy to share with the nurses, even when she barely ate anything herself. The hardest part was not mentioning Mom at all, but after 17 drafts, I finally had something that was just about Rose. My phone buzzed with a text from my ex saying she heard about Rose from a mutual friend and thought I should forgive my mom for my own peace. I typed back thanks for reaching out and hit the block button because I didn't need another person telling me how to feel about Mom choosing brunch over her dying daughter. The next morning, Diane had set up an appointment with Nina Schaefer, who did grief counseling and had an opening that same week. I drove to her office, which was in an old house converted to therapy rooms, and the intake form asked about family support during this time. I checked the box for none, and Nina circled it with this knowing look like she'd seen this before. She sat across from me in a chair instead of behind a desk and explained that what Mom showed was a pattern of emotional neglect and narcissistic traits, which gave me actual words for what I'd been dealing with my whole life. When I started getting mad talking about the brunch, she taught me this breathing technique where you breathe in for 4 counts and hold for 4 and out for 4, which actually helped my hands stop shaking. We spent the rest of the session working on an email to Mom that would set boundaries for the memorial planning. I wanted to write that she was a selfish monster who let her daughter die alone, but Nina helped me revise it to say all memorial planning would go through me, and our contact would be limited to logistics only. The email took 40 minutes to get right, because Nina kept having me remove the angry parts and focus on clear boundaries instead of accusations. I sent it from her office, and within 10 minutes Mom had replied with 3 paragraphs about how her own mother wasn't there for her, and how she was breaking generational cycles, and how I'd understand when I had kids of my own. I showed Nina the response, and she actually printed it out and put it in my file as what she called Exhibit A of deflection tactics. She pointed out how Mom never once addressed my boundaries or acknowledged what happened with Rose, but instead made herself the victim. I sent back a 2-word reply that just said received and memorial planning details to follow. Mom immediately sent 17 more texts that I could see piling up in my notifications, but I didn't open any of them, and Nina said that was progress. 2 days later, Conrad called to schedule a return-to-work meeting, and I met him at a coffee shop near the office. He explained that I could start with half-days next week and build up to full-time by the end of the month, which actually sounded good because sitting at home was making everything worse. He said the team was struggling to cover my projects, but they understood and wanted to support me however they could. The structure of having somewhere to be and something to focus on besides the empty space where Rose used to be actually helped more than I expected. That night, the funeral home called to say Rose's ashes were ready, and I drove over to pick up the purple urn with butterflies engraved on it that Lainey had added for free. I brought it home and set it on my coffee table next to her rainbow drawing and tried to practice reading the eulogy out loud. Every time I got to the part where I described her saying, "It's okay," my voice would crack and I'd have to start over. I sat there with just the urn and the drawing like we were having our own private memorial service and practiced until I could get through most of it without completely breaking down. The next morning, I had another session with Nina, where we talked about Mom's need for attention and how the memorial would probably become her performance. Nina reminded me that I couldn't control Mom's behavior, but I could control my response to it, and we practiced phrases I could use if Mom tried to make a scene. She gave me homework to choose one thing I would let go of at the memorial and one behavior of Mom's that I wouldn't react to no matter what. I decided I'd let go of trying to make mom understand what she did, and I wouldn't react if she cried fake tears for attention. Nina said those were good specific goals, and we role-played different scenarios where mom might try to provoke me. By the end of the session, I had a plan for getting through the memorial without letting mom turn it into her show. 3 days before the memorial, mom posted a Facebook event for Saturday at 2 p.m. at her country club. The actual service was Friday at 11 a.m. at the hospice chapel. I saw it when 17 people RSVP'd yes and started posting condolences on the event page. My fingers shook as I typed a correction in the comments section. I kept it simple and factual, just the right time and place, nothing about how she hadn't even asked me. Mom immediately called me screaming that I was undermining her in public. I hung up and drove to my session with Nina. She had me write down one thing I'd let go of at the memorial. I chose trying to make mom understand what she did to Rose. Then she asked me to pick one mom behavior I wouldn't react to no matter what. I decided on her fake crying for attention. We practiced responses for different scenarios where mom might try to start something. Nina kept reminding me this was about honoring Rose, not winning against mom. She had me repeat phrases like, "This isn't the time," and "Let's focus on Rose," until they felt natural. That night, I made a list of who was actually coming for Rose. Eleanor had confirmed she'd be there with 2 other teachers from Rose's school. The hospice nurses were coming on their lunch break. These were the people who really knew her, not mom's book club friends. I decided to focus on them instead of whatever show mom would put on. The memorial morning came, and I got there an hour early to set up Rose's drawings around the room. I placed her stuffed animals on a table by the entrance with a photo from before she got sick. People started arriving at 10:45, and I stood at the podium organizing my eulogy cards. Mom wasn't there at 11 when we were supposed to start. I could see people checking their phones and whispering. At 11:05, I just started without her. I was 3 sentences into talking about Rose's love of butterflies when the door banged open. Mom swept in wearing a black cocktail dress with her hair and makeup perfect. She signed the guest book with big dramatic movements while I kept reading. I didn't pause or acknowledge her entrance even when she made a show of finding a seat in the front row. I talked about how Rose collected butterfly stickers and put them on everything. I described her terrible knock-knock jokes that never made sense, but always made her laugh. I told them about the Frozen songs she'd sing during chemo to cheer up the other kids. Real tears were flowing from the nurses and teachers who remembered these moments. Mom kept dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue, turning to check if people were watching her. When I finished, people came up to hug me and share their own Rose memories. Mom grabbed my arm and pulled me into the corner. She hissed that I'd humiliated her by not mentioning her once in the eulogy. She called me cruel and selfish for excluding her own mother from her daughter's memorial. I said the phrase Nina and I had practiced. "This isn't the time." Then I walked away to thank Eleanor for coming. She was standing by Rose's drawings with tears streaming down her face. She handed me a small paper butterfly that Rose had made in art class. It was covered in purple glitter with "I love you" written in Rose's shaky handwriting. Eleanor told me Rose was the kindest child she'd taught in 20 years. She said Rose always shared her snacks with kids who forgot theirs. We both stood there crying real tears while across the room Mom held court with her friends. I could hear her loud voice talking about her unbearable loss. That night, my phone buzzed with a group text Mom sent to all our relatives. She claimed I'd banned her from speaking at her own daughter's memorial. She said I was keeping her from her rightful place as a grieving mother. She painted herself as the victim of my cruelty during the worst time of her life. Some relatives responded with sympathy for her. Others stayed silent. I archived the thread without reading the responses and turned off my phone. The next morning, I met William at the funeral home to collect Rose's ashes. The purple urn looked smaller than I expected. Lainey had added the butterfly engraving for free, delicate wings spreading across the surface. Before they sealed it, I slipped Rose's letter inside, the one that said she hoped Mommy wouldn't be sad. William handled the paperwork quietly, while I signed where he pointed. I thanked them both and carried Rose out to my car. The urn sat in the passenger seat on the drive home. That afternoon, Conrad called about my return to work. We worked out starting with 2 days the next week, then 3 days the week after. We'd build back to full-time over the month. He didn't mention my red eyes during our video call. He didn't comment when I had to mute myself because a commercial with kids came on. He just sent the adjusted schedule and said the team was there for whatever I needed. Nina sat across from me in her office the next morning with a box of tissues between us. She asked how the memorial went, and I told her about Mom showing up late in her cocktail dress. Nina nodded and wrote something down while I described Mom cornering me after my eulogy. She explained that Mom's need to be the center of attention was probably how she dealt with hard feelings. Nina said understanding why Mom acted this way didn't mean I had to accept it or let it hurt me. She taught me a new breathing exercise where I counted to 4 on each inhale and exhale. We practiced what I'd say if Mom tried to guilt me about the memorial again. Nina reminded me that protecting myself while grieving Rose wasn't selfish. She scheduled me for twice a week for the next month and gave me a workbook about complicated grief. That afternoon, Diane called while I was sorting through Rose's things. She wanted to check how I was doing after everything with the memorial. She confirmed the grief support group met Thursday evenings at 7 at the community center on Oak Street. Diane said lots of people there had complicated family situations and understood what it was like. She promised I wouldn't be alone in dealing with Mom's behavior on top of losing Rose. I thanked her for everything she'd done, and she reminded me her door was always open if I needed to talk. After hanging up, I went back to Rose's room with 2 empty boxes from the garage. I put her favorite stuffed animals in the keep box first. Her purple unicorn that she slept with every night went in carefully. Then her collection of butterfly books from the library sales we used to go to together. I found her iPad with all her games still downloaded and wrapped it in bubble wrap. The donate box got filled with clothes that still had tags and toys she never opened. I called Eleanor to see if she could handle taking them to the children's ward. She said she'd be happy to do it so I wouldn't have to go back to the hospital yet. We arranged for her to pick them up tomorrow morning before school. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank piece of paper and started writing to Rose. I told her I was trying to remember her laugh instead of how quiet she got at the end. I wrote about how I'd watch Frozen every year on her birthday, even though I knew all the songs by heart now. I promised to feed the ducks at the pond like we used to do on Saturdays. The words got blurry as tears dropped onto the paper, but I kept writing. I told her about Mom at the memorial and how I wished she could have been different for Rose. I sealed the letter in an envelope and wrote butterfly on the front in purple marker. The next morning, I figured out how to set up email filters on my phone. I created a folder called Mom and set all her messages to go there automatically. The main inbox looked so clean without her constant texts about how I was ruining her life. I decided I'd check the Mom folder once a week on Sundays to see if anything was actually important. The relief hit me immediately, like someone had turned down the volume on a screaming TV. 2 days later, I drove to the botanical garden with Rose's urn on the passenger seat. The butterfly exhibit was in the back, past the rose garden, which felt right somehow. I paid the entrance fee and walked the familiar path we'd taken so many times before. The bench by the butterfly house was empty, so I sat down with the urn in my lap. Butterflies flew around the enclosed space, landing on flowers and feeders. A blue morpho with wings as big as my hand landed on the bench right next to me. It stayed there for almost a minute, opening and closing its wings in the sunlight. I chose to believe it was Rose telling me she was okay wherever she was now. I sat there for an hour watching the butterflies and telling Rose about everything that had happened. Monday morning, Conrad had my desk ready with a stack of easy assignments to ease back in. He didn't make a big deal about me being back or ask how I was doing every 5 minutes. The team acted normal, which was exactly what I needed instead of everyone tiptoeing around me. When I felt the anger building about Mom or the sadness about Rose, I did Nina's breathing exercises. I counted to 4 breathing in and 4 breathing out until my hands stopped shaking. I made it through the whole day without crying or leaving early, which felt like a win. 3 weeks after Rose died, I used thumbtacks to hang her rainbow drawing above my desk at work. Every time I looked up from my computer, I could see those stick figures holding hands. That same day, I filled out the registration form for the grief support group online. I wrote my name and checked the box for sibling loss and complicated family dynamics. The confirmation email said to bring a photo if I wanted to share about my person. I printed the picture of Rose at the butterfly garden from last summer when she was still healthy. Now I'd carry her with me differently. Not as weight pulling me down, but as wings helping me move forward. And that's the wrap up for today. If even one piece of this stuck with you, then it was worth sharing. Hit subscribe and you'll always have the next takeaway waiting.